Our topic is policies and leadership. And policies and leadership are two different ways of driving results. Policies, as we all know, I'm a policy guy, that's what I do for a living. Policies create the bounding conditions for action, the parameters. It's the side that in a way is very abstract. They are rules of the game. And then leadership is deeply and intrinsically human. And I think we all know leadership when we see it, when we feel it. Think about, I ask each of you, think about when you sat at a table and you knew, as we would say where I'm from, leadership is in the house. Ah, this is leadership, right? We all know that vibe, that feeling. Something's going to happen. We're not going to just talk. So in that spirit, we start our discussion today. What is the kind of leadership we need right now to begin making the progress that we need to make? One of the speakers in the last panel said, you've got to disrupt things. I couldn't agree more. What is the disruption in leadership? What is the change, the phase transition we need in leadership right now to begin achieving the progress that we need? Dubai, I begin with you, please. Tell us your thoughts.
I think the key word I would like to put forth when it comes to leadership, particularly on the SDGs, is inclusivity. And I mean that in every sense of the word, because we have seen too many efforts when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs in different contexts and different parts of the world, where there is almost a theatrical empowerment of youth, of women, of different minority groups, and we need to take it beyond the group photo, as they say, and actually put people on the table and listen to them and implement their solutions, and not to do it as a branding exercise for the SDGs themselves. And I'm not sure how exactly we will do it, but I think it starts with taking it beyond just putting members on a panel or putting them on boards, but actually implementing solutions that are unique to their own socio-political contexts and challenges.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. That's one that I've seen. That's one that I've witnessed. When you do a strategy workshop and you say, let's bring the young bloods in, give some smart ones on, and then suddenly it's the 23-year-old who says, guys, sorry, but the way you're trying to solve this is about 20 years old. Give me 2 hours and some platform technology will solve it for you much faster. That's when you know it's not just performative, 100%. Dr. Yasir, please, to you, sir. What do we need now?
Let's start by looking at what matters to people, okay? I mean, Dubai just said, let's make it actionable. But again, if you look at the word, people understand simple stuff. I mean, if you go and ask people what is SDG, I bet if we walk outside this room, go anywhere in the world, on the streets, maybe 1 person out of 100, if we're lucky, to understand SDG. SDG is not football. I mean, everyone understands football. So in order for us to really put SDG in real action, that's where I'll quote Dubai and everyone else. Everyone has to contribute to it, starting from homes, society, individuals. Government can put policies. Private sector can invest. I mean, I don't think we have a shortage of money. I mean, in fact, inflation currently and all these interest rates is hiking to the roof because they want to suck more of the cash that we have. So instead, let's direct it there. So we don't have a problem with resources. I mean, we just need to be smart how to use them. What SDG needs is everybody speaks about it and everybody works on it, because that will require huge efforts. His Excellency Abdulla Lota said, we haven't done enough. 11 trillion until 2030 that this SDG is supposed to add to the economy, and we're not even making a dent. And we, you know, according to the United Nations report, we're not even achieving. So I think if we really want to create the impact, everyone should shout that impact, and everyone starting not just from, you know, the government or the business or, you know, even the NGOs, but it starts from homes, because we have to hit there and in a language that they understand. This is where you're going to say, oh, SDG is really making a sense, because they are driving that change. So this is where we need to start.
100%. Marie-Aime, the same question for you. You have such a perspective. We have some things in common, you know, from working in financial institutions. And we know in that environment, it's so easy for the conversation to take place in the same 7 variables it always has, because calculating the return on investment is straightforward. At least it used to seem straightforward. What needs to change in leadership for us to start having the progress that we need?
So I'd say we need to empower leaders that have the courage of making the decisions to prioritize the SDGs over the rest. Because currently there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of commitments. We have the VNRs for the countries, the NDCs, we have the net zero commitments from so many large corporations, so many cities, and yet things are not happening. As we will see, we're very far behind. But if this group of highly influential leaders were genuinely caring for prioritizing the SDGs and then having the courage of making the decision that needs to be made, then things would progress. And when I think about it, so it was said in the previous panel, we have all the technical solutions. We have in most countries enabling regulation, we have the taxonomies, etc. We have all these pledges, so why aren't we doing it? And I think really having leaders that care about this prioritization of the SDGs over the rest and the courage to take those decisions would really make a difference. So are we empowering those leaders? Are we promoting them? Or do we continue to promote and empower the leaders that maintain the business as usual?
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I think I lead something called the National Transformations Institute. We're all about change. But I'm glad my team's not here, but I'll confess to you, but I thought as you were speaking, Dr. Yasir, and as you were speaking just now, how often, though, do our meetings and our planning meetings still just stay within the boundaries that we're trying to accomplish next? When was the last time I said, what are we going to do to shift the curve on the SDGs? And until something bites, until a change is uncomfortable, it probably hasn't happened. And nowhere, Dubai, is maybe that more painful and more obvious, as I've experienced firsthand for years, than in multilateral diplomacy. And I know you had the chance recently to sit with President Macron and others and look at the challenge of multilateral progress. Because I think one thing that we can agree, and it's a natural function of diplomacy, that it gets geared towards words, because it's easier to agree on words than to agree on actions. So what needs to happen in terms of multilateral leadership? What do you observe as the change that's necessary in that context?
Before giving you my full opinion on that question, I have to start by saying I am a multilateralist, so I fully believe in the cause. But I think the issue with rhetoric surrounding multilateralism is that it operates on the false assumption that all countries start on an equal footing, and they don't. Developing countries have suffered for years and some of them decades from the negative impact of colonization, where they've had their natural resources depleted, where they did not start leading their countries in the same way or maybe in the same advantages as other more progressed, for the lack of a better term, countries have in other parts of the world. So it's very easy to sort of have a scoring sheet and say country X is progressing more than country Y on SDG 1 or 2 or 3, when really we cannot have that conversation without taking into account historical nuance and where the countries went wrong in terms of assessing and measuring impact of who does better on which SDG. And I think a big part of bureaucracy, perhaps, and you need some form of bureaucracy to run multilateral organizations, but this obsession with quantitative data, the KPIs that look good on our presentations versus qualitative data, which actually puts a very human-centric focus on the impact of initiatives. That's what we're missing a lot of focus on, I think.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Someone behind me has suffered through too many G20 meetings like I have, and where that's so true. And it's always true because I guess any institution has a language. It has a language and it has bureaus, and those are fixed, and it's hard to change them, and the conversation can stay bounded so tightly within those. But another piece of the puzzle that's so important, of course, is human capital. And everyone is speaking about the urgency and the huge gaps we still have to achieve what we need to in terms of skilling and upskilling people. It's another one of these cases, I wonder if you share this experience where people are talking about it so much that the more people talk about it, it can start to feel like it's getting rubbed out of your brain. Okay, it's just a thing. But we need leadership in that front. Dr. Yasir, first of all, congratulations on your new role as a citizen of this world. I'm grateful that you have it. What kind of leadership do we need? What do we need in the human capital space to begin accelerating progress?
I've been reading so many reports. Some reports say, well, we have a skill gap that will, if we close it, it will add 15 trillion to the economy by 2030. Some says, 10 for just only the G20. Some says, 30 if it adds to the economy by 2032. They all disagree on the number, but they agree in one thing. There is a skill gap. And this is what we need to focus on. The more we go on time, the shorter the span is for a skill to stay. So there is an expiry date for skill and knowledge. And we need really to keep and focus on that. Because what used to work yesterday might not work tomorrow. There's so many change that's happening for the first time ever that the human trying to catch up with the change. Now, if we look on reality and related to SDG, we're trying to catch up in the things that we want to achieve. Now, the rate of change is happening faster and faster. Here in the UAE, we realize that there is not too much to do. Where I mean that there is not too much to do, it means no matter what we do, it's not enough when it comes to reskilling and upskilling and, and developing and going forward to the people. The organization that I'm heading, Abu Dhabi School of Government, where we are focusing so much on reskilling, upskilling for the whole human capital in Abu Dhabi. But when it comes to the whole UAE, we have bodies that focusing on that. But what we came to realize many years ago, that upskilling and reskilling to close the gap comes from something that we both discuss, learn how to learn. Easy and easier said than it's done. But we started with a society. We're starting to push learning and development from the society itself, from the houses. So when the change happens, if we look at what happens the last 3 years, the COVID, I think the skill gap become higher than what we expected because there's so many disruptive approaches and emerging technology that happens. Yunus has spoken about some, the other panelists have spoken about them, but these are the only thing that, some of the things that maybe the media have picked. So we need to be really careful about how we measure, how we do this, because there is no enough when it comes to SDG. So what I'm saying here is that let's make sure that we do the 300% and 400% because 100% is not enough to close the skill gaps that it's changing rapidly and in a shorter span.
100%. Thank you so much. I had a conversation with a dear friend of mine who does the work related to what you do, but from a technology standpoint. He mentioned the test of sincerity in this upskilling is, there are some countries now, I guess, I'm sure you know this, I've just learned it. They're analyzing the time that a child has throughout a day, and they're saying, what are the windows where they actually could learn something? So now they're getting training on their phones when they're driving to and from school or finding channels. More than that example, more than the technology, it's the aniyah. Whoever was driving that policy was actually trying to get them the skills. Not, let's say we're doing something, let's have a plan, but actually targeting, which I love. Now, although we acknowledge we're seeing it so much, there's plenty of resources to be invested. And I don't know, for most of my life, I thought money could solve so many problems, but by itself it doesn't. And then the connectivity between money and the change we want to see can seem so broken, so dysfunctional. It's not happening. How can impact investors and financial institutions, Marie-Aime, how can they work with the public sector and other stakeholders more productively to accelerate change?
Sure. So I think impact investing can bring a lot of lessons to the rest of the financial community and other stakeholders like public or corporates, because it has experimented a way to do at the same time impact and profits, which seems to be something that any economic actor might be looking for. So they have three, impact investing is grounded on three main rules: intentionality, additionality, and measurability. And these could be applied to any other economic actor. So intentionality, as we've said, everybody has said, okay, I want to follow the SDGs, setting themselves commitments, net zero commitments, etc. Okay, but what an impact investor does, it's not setting goals for 2040 or 50. They're investors, they want some goals that are going to be achieved in the next 5, 10, maybe 15 years. So we need to be more disciplined into setting ourselves targets for the coming years and not for the coming decades. So that's something we can learn from impact investing. Then on additionality, and I think that's really the key point, is each actor, whether it's financial actor or economic actor, needs to push itself to do the most it can in order to bridge the gaps, because sustainable development goals are not about goals in absolute value. They're about identifying gaps and putting the resources, the action, and the financing of those actions towards the most under-addressed issues and underserved people, not continuing the business as usual and flagging it at SDG. Okay, I'm doing renewable energy, so that's SDG 7. I'm doing construction, so that's SDG 11. This is not achieving anything. So,
except labeling.
Except labeling, and that's why there's so much thing going on around greenwashing, impact washing, anything washing. So what impact investing community is doing is actually identifying a gap where there's a need for a new solution, and they are creating the ecosystem and providing the funding to bridge that gap. And I think this additionality discipline is something that everybody can take on. And it's possible thanks to blended finance, which is the, just a way of working between private sector and public or multilateral entities, where the actors that can take most risk are taking it, so that the actors that can take less risk are crowded in. And so it's very essential today that those public actors and multilateral and development finance institutions take the most risk so that they crowd in private investors instead of competing against the same project and not really achieving additionality. And the last thing is measurability. And that's something as well where impact investors are very strict on reporting in an as equally precise way on their profits and on their impacts. And I think this is something also we can learn from for any project we're doing or we're financing, making sure that we set from the beginning what are the targeted impacts, how are we going to measure it, what money we need to invest to have the reporting tool, the digital tool that will give us the data to see if the objective has been achieved or not in terms of impact, not only financial return. So there's a lot we can learn on and work together, bringing in impact investors and scaling them up at the level of the financial community.
And if I may, a follow-up question. There's been so much discussion, including at Davos recently, of what needs to be done in terms of making disclosure more consistent globally for financial institutions. How important is it? How important would be some agreement on the disclosure required of all companies from a financial standpoint? Is there a lot of power in that? Again, this panel, ladies and gentlemen, this panel is all about what's going to really work, not what sounds good. So given your expertise, what do you think? How important is that work to have more global agreement on what corporations have to disclose?
I think it's already well advanced in terms of homogenizing the taxonomies and the metrics on which both corporates and financial institutions need to report. For example, in Europe, as you know, we have these two new regulations, CSRD and the SFDR, that are imposing on, and that's very good, because that's accelerating the process, imposing on financial institutions and corporates to actually disclose a large number of information that were not disclosed before, and that are going to inform all stakeholders about how they're doing on decarbonization, on impact on biodiversity, dependence on biodiversity, etc. And all this information is going to be, very useful to then identify the gaps and see how to solve them.
Great, wonderful. And that was Dubai, as you would expect, an intentional segue to a question for you about transparency and accountability. So there's so many places to hide in this world, right, from real change. It's so easy to leave the meeting and say the right things and nothing happens. In fact, arguably, that's the default. How important are transparency and accountability, and what is it going to take to institutionalize them and harness them to a greater extent? Please.
I think if we're still talking about the multilateral context, I can answer that question, because we've entrusted multilateral institutions to be the sort of guardians of the SDGs in many ways. But the power dynamics that govern these multilateral institutions are not reflective of 2023. They're still reflective of 1945. And so how can you actually expect accountability and transparency when the system itself in those multilateral institutions was not built for the kind of challenges that we're dealing with today? So an actual global reform on what these custodians or guardians of the SDGs is long overdue. And I also don't want that to be a sort of another, just talking or another keyword of global reform. We hear it in Davos, we hear it in different places. What would that actually look like? And you see it happen from UNGA to another. It's always an agenda item. It's always almost like kicking the can down the road to the next UNGA as well. So when will we actually see an action-based plan for that when it comes to making power dynamics or making power distributions equal in these institutions, for us then to be able to actually hold different parties accountable in an equal way?
I'm so with you on that. And forgive me for just a moment speaking as an American. So many Americans feel that what the United States can most productively do for itself in the world is to adhere to the standards and principles that founded our country in this broader context, which is just what you're describing. That's what we fought for, So I think it's not, of course, just the United States that's blocking progress on that. There's so many, because it's more comfortable to be in the status quo.
Yes.
And engineering any sacrifice of power is so difficult, but it has to happen to be distributed to get what we need done. Dr. Yasir, back to now policy leadership. So if policy is one thing and leadership is another, but then they come together, policy leadership. So when you look at the challenges we're facing from the perspective of policy, what do you see as the frontier of change? Where do we need to go? How does the policy leadership side need to evolve? Please.
Okay, let me pick some words, what you guys have been saying. Agility, fast, accelerated, impact, all of these. This is the form of policy that we're looking for. I mean, there are countries, and you mentioned one, Dubai has mentioned some examples of what things are not working. We need to refresh policies. What we need to look at, creating policy that will lead us and works for us, not policies that will just govern. Unfortunately, the design of the policies and what we've seen does not speak SDG, does not speak things in action, does not speak impact. And they're very difficult. I mean, I can ask even the audience again, going back to asking the audience. We have different understanding of policies, but if we really work on the right things to say, okay, what do we need from policy? What do we need? Why do we need to design a policy in a certain way? Why do we need to put a policy? Why do we need to kill a policy? We need to understand what policies, what policies we need to get rid of, because some of the things that are forming the countries are being based on 50, 70, 100 years ago. Yeah. And I was speaking about 2030 SDG and what will happen in 2030. And we the year 2023, and there are things that if you go and open the books and doesn't make any sense. You just gave an example of, a young person who can tell you, okay, this is an old approach, I can finish it within seconds just by using technology. So if you go to ChatGPT now, and put, make a policy, I think it will make better policies in many places that I don't want to mention as well. But let's really think about what matters. Because of the diversity in the world, now the options are so many on the world, there's so much to learn. You want to make something works, make it simple. Please, let's stop making things complicated. Seriously. Let's stop making things complicated. We want to ask a question, what policy needs to achieve? It has to serve the purpose that is created to do by having the impact, utilizing the resources, being accelerated impact, and making sense for the young before, not the young. I'm not going to say the word. So please, let's make sure we focus on something called simplicity, not complexity anymore, because the world have enough complexity within the system.
Oh, 1,000%. If we can just have a brief geek out moment in this panel, I would love it. Cass Sunstein writes about sludge. This, in the policy environment, exactly what you're describing, this accumulated sludge and hassle where citizens face policy arrangements that are crisscrossing, that are 50 years old, that in their net obviate the possibility for any coherent movement. Why? Because the policymaker of the new one, as you said, the policymaker of the new one was really focused on their intention to get their policy done, not the passionate intention to achieve the outcome. Because if they had that passionate intention to achieve the outcome, they would have said, but these other 20 policies are no longer working. I never heard somebody say it on a stage. I thank you for that. By the way, the European Union is learning this. The European Union, I think, is a tremendous force for good in this world. Truly, I'm an American who believes in the European project. I really do. But as you also know, they can take a lesson from Dr. Yasir. Why? Because they've added a whole policy layer on top of national policy arrangements and not sufficiently removed the national layer. So my friends in the private sector say, try doing business in Europe. When you've got now an EU layer, maybe it's exquisite, and a national layer, and this layer. And what's the net result of all of that? Inertia. Inertia, which is exactly what we don't need. Please, tell me, as a person in the private sector, policy, how do you experience these obstacles, and how do you see possible solutions? It's a small question.
Yes. Easy to see.
Before she answers, let me just say something. I was just listening to one of the leaders in Visa, and she said, I have to deal with 140 different policies for data that, around the world, and I have to, this is just the data, just one subject, and I have to change the whole business model to fit that. See, that's costing them almost, around the world, costing the whole world $1 trillion a year, just as a cost. So
it's too complex a question, but what I could give as an example is inconsistency in policies. For example, if you take Europe, I think Europe is doing a great job at pushing the green, the green agenda. So putting a lot of money out to stimulate green economy and enabling the countries to invest into renewable, etc. At the same time, building the taxonomy, the green taxonomy that gives a framework, a common language for everyone, with sufficient, I would say, discipline into what's green, what's not green. So that's good. That's very positive, and it's creating transparency. It's creating an influx. But at the same time, we have all the ECB, so the European Central Bank rules that are imposed, for example, on banks like us, which put us more restriction into financing new type of business that we've never financed before. If we want to do that now, it consumes more capital for us. So how are we going to do to finance those new technologies, these new hydrogen, plants, or other type of, new energy efficiency business models if the banking regulation is telling us it's going to cost us more capital to do this. Leverage lending is another issue. A lot of those different new technologies and new projects are financed on project finance basis. Well, we have this new regulation that tells us, well, you should not do leverage lending. And, you know, project finance is leverage lending. So the problem is the inconsistency between, you know, within the same continent, I'm not even speaking about the US or Africa or elsewhere, between the different, you know, contradictory injunctions that are given to the same actors. So if we could have a bit more coherence in there, I think we would be able to achieve more, because otherwise we're stuck in the bureaucracy, because we have to comply with all the rules, and banks, more than anybody else, I think, are over-regulated and over-scrutinized, and that's why it's more difficult for us to, you know, to play our role.
Absolutely. I think if these kind of obstacles and inertia in our existing systems, if we don't solve them, I predict that a crisis will solve them. I predict that we'll suffer and have to solve them because of suffering. My mentor said to me, you can either suffer or meditate. He preferred to meditate. Maybe suffer or solve. Better to solve. So let's have one final round of questions for each of you, and it links to COP28. As we approach COP28, hopefully a lot of great things will happen there. But what are some of the most important things that you would like to see happen before we get there? Before getting there, what do you think should be the key priorities in the spirit of the discussion that we've had? Dubai, please, I begin with you.
I think this may not be something that COP28 alone solves, but I think it's worth using COP28 to address. And it is moving beyond a very black and white discussion of climate change when it comes to international global debates, us versus them. You know, this sector versus that sector. You're either the good guys or the bad guys. This approach is helping no one, and it's definitely not helping the climate. So to actually have an interdisciplinary as well as a diverse a group of voices as well as solutions. You know, it is sector-wide. Both in terms of impact, but as well as in terms of solutions. And it's not the kind of issue that we want to just leave to the engineers and to the policymakers. We want to bring in the culture sector as well. We want to bring in the artists, the writers, and to truly provide interdisciplinary solutions to this, because climate change impacts us all. And the more we merge policymaker with cultural creative, the better, and I think more nuanced the solution would be. So that's something I would love to see personally.
I'm so with you. By the way, I was, just to your point, I want to ask a follow-up question if I may, but when my dear colleague Elena Sigo was asking the last panelist questions, I wanted to raise my hand, but I thought it would be rude. But now I have the mic. So, you know, can you imagine, for the purpose of building a nuclear bomb, we had the Manhattan Project. And as you all know, the Manhattan Project was no holds barred, everything we need to make a decisive bit of progress. Carbon capture and sequestration, there are technologies out there that can solve it, but they are not scalable enough. Imagine a Chinese, Middle East, you know, GCC, American, European Manhattan Project to take carbon out of the atmosphere and scale it. I mean, this is doable. And so I guess I would add to your answer, I hope that maybe more radical thinking on collaboration would be possible. But before we move on.
And if I may add.
Please. I wanted to, please.
One more thing, I think over the years, and again, this is one unintentional obstacle, I think, in multilateral discussions. It's also one way of defining what good science is. And I'm talking specifically about indigenous communities and the role that their contribution has into natural climate homegrown solutions. So it's not just, you know, not just looking at science that is particularly or exclusively produced by Western research centers, but also knowledge that is produced in other parts of the world that may not necessarily be produced in English, but that does not make it less than or not good enough to be as scalable as a global solution.
When you say that, last year I had a chance to go to Jaipur and see the 500-year-old palace with air cooling built only on architecture. Nowhere was that manual written in MIT in English. Dr. Yasir. He asked me not to call him His Excellency, so I'm not. Dr. Yasir, what do you see? Before COP28, what do you think is our highest priority?
Okay, let's start by what's the message that UAE is trying to send by hosting COP28. I mean, a country like UAE, which is, you know, 50 years old, hosting an event like this You know, if we talk numbers, UAE population is 0.001% of the whole population. But a country like UAE trying to create that impact, that's a message that the other countries should also realize that if we can do a change, you know, and you guys can see it around you just in this small short of time with whatever, and these host of the people, we have 10,000 people attending this event talking about the same issues in the land of hope that we call the UAE. I think that is the message by itself. COP28 is not just an event that happens in the UAE, it's a commitment from the UAE to the whole world. So this is what we need to show the world, that if we put our hands together, and even, you know, a player like UAE can contribute, even the size of the country is not big, but the contribution is huge and massive. It's not about the size, but it's about the impact. So I start from there. So if we think about what we need to do in before COP28 and even beyond, I think, you know, it's very important that we pick up the discussion that we have said, is what we want from this SDG in action related with COP28. It's all related to each other. I mean, what we want is a better world for us. A better world. I mean, the friction is bigger than ever. The problems that we are facing, I mean, nobody have imagined that, 2022 is going to be that actionable with so many things happen. So we started 2023 and everyone speaks about ChatGPT. It's been there for a long time. I mean, I don't know, guys, about you, but it's been there for almost 10 years. It's online. It's been there, but it's been picked by the media. So I'm asking, my question is not just what we need to do as COP28, because I think we have the intention. We know what needs to be done. In the UAE, in the last 2 years, we have changed, I think, 800 policies and laws just in the span of 2 years. The reason being is that we want to be more agile and we want to be faster. So what we need to do is we need to focus on that as countries to change, because it doesn't work before, it is not going to work again here in this era. So if we look at what happened in the world in ChatGPT, the media decided that this is going to be the subject of 2023. So why they can't? Everyone speaks about ChatGPT. I mean, I can tell and you look around and I ask everyone what's ChatGPT, and everyone is going to say, okay, it's a nice open AI that's, been supported by Microsoft and Elon Musk. Wow, everyone is educated just in a short period of time. Huh? It's a very short period of time. We're talking 2 weeks ago. Only 2 weeks ago, guys. Huh? Imagine. And everyone, I bet 100%, if it's, between around 90 and 100, I'm not going to be 100%, but nothing is 100%. Everyone speaks about that. So I'm calling the whole world as a media, as an individual, speak about SDG, speak about what we need to think and make noise out of it. Because if it's not something that we discuss every day, and I bet not a day goes by without you hearing from somebody about ChatGPT. So if we want to really get there, we want to get to the SDG, you want your son or you want your daughter who comes from school and they say, this is what we learned today about SDG. So that's the thing that we need to do, disruptive transformation, making the biggest noise that we want to do if we really want to create that impact. Thank you.
Marie-Aime, please, what do you want to see?
So I'm thinking about two things, two disruptive things. So one, I think, should be achievable, and the otherwise, unfortunately, I don't hope it's going to be achieved, but it would be so great a catalyst to enable action if it was. So the first one is really about blended finance. If we want to achieve decarbonization, whether it's in developed countries or developing economies, where most of the population lives and where the growth of the population is going to be the highest, so it's super important that this growth is green. We need to do a much better job at using blended finance schemes, which means that public money, development finance institutions, multilateral development banks are actually crowding in private investors instead of crowding them out, which is currently what often happens. So not a dollar of public financing goes without at least 1 cent of private money that has been credit enhanced by this public money. And this, I think, can be achieved. And for example, I participated to an action plan proposing very concrete solution to actually enable this. And it was presented at the COP27. So I hope at COP28, we're actually going to implement that action plan. And the second thing, which is disruptive, but I think is the meta objective that is necessary if we really want to achieve those SDGs, is we have to switch from the current goalpost of the world, which is the GDP, which is production-based, and only certain type of production, and not accounting for all the externalities that actually fuel such production. So we have to switch from this goalpost to an impact-based goalpost, which is what are we trying to achieve for our population while respecting the planetary boundaries. GDP is absolutely failing that objective. GDP is just about producing stuff. So everybody is looking at their GDP rate, but if we continue to just manage the countries by this sole goalpost, we can do as many COPs as we want. This is just two contradictory objectives to try to achieve the SDGs and to try to have a perpetual GDP growth. So we at some point, and I know it's not going to happen before COP28, but we need to find another indicator that is impact-based that replaces the GDP. Voilà, my hope.
I could not agree more. Brilliant. I couldn't agree more. Dubai, before I close this thing out, anything else you'd like to add before I close this thing out?
I'm more interested in listening.
I know, but I want to make sure that your voice comes shining through. I have to say a couple things, forgive me. But first of all, 1 week ago, I heard an interview with Max Tegmark. He's a physicist. This is amazing, guys. This is dessert. I serve you your cappuccino and your cookie. So Max Tegmark, one of the world's leading physicists, was saying, why is there order and not entropy? The first law of thermodynamics, everything should be going to entropy. But look at this. I don't know about you, this doesn't feel like entropy to me. This is order. And his hypothesis, Faradilla, only a first Faradilla, is that order increases when attention is given to something. So when you describe this noise, you're so right. It never occurred to me. ChatGPT, 2 weeks ago, we didn't know it. Now everyone knows it. It's possible to shift attention. So then where do we really want to mobilize intention? And by choosing where we really want to mobilize intention, and by putting inclusiveness to work, and by thinking smartly about finance and regulation and the proper incentives, we will make the change we need. Thank you so much.
Thank you.